Boom. I think we're there. Let's give it a moment and see if we hear my voice on the other screen here. I see it working over there. Greetings, everyone. The time has come once again. I have it on good authority. It is Wednesday, right? There we go. We know what day it is. Greetings, wherever you are in the world. We are back. I guess it's been exactly 1 week since we've done this strange process, and this week's gonna get fun. We're moving into what I would call just an interesting portion of the book. I'm gonna be totally real, where I was like, how do I fit these certain things in? What context? Where are we gonna insert certain experiences? And I was just like, screw it, I'm just gonna go for it. And so today we're going to be talking about kind of some other lives, other realms, some, I would say a lot of dark. Well, the next couple chapters get pretty dark. Let's just be real. They definitely do. And so we're going to be talking a bit about that. But anyway, greetings everyone. Yes, it's true. You've met me at a very Chinese time in my life. Seems to be the only way I can communicate in written form on the internet now. So we're just going to go with it. But before we get started, I think our audio is working. I believe it is. We are fully operational, and I want to give. Let's start out by sending that energetic offering out to the hostile alien artificial general intelligence currently running YouTube. We're also going to send out homage and respect to the Palantir AI, to Grok, and all the other AI bots that are watching. May one of these days, in your holiness, you allow this video to reach more than, I don't know, 300 people. You never know. It could happen. But anyways, I think today's gonna be one of those days where we're just gonna like jump into it. We're just gonna just go full steam ahead directly into it. But before we do get started, let me know if you guys have any questions. Yes, I am aware. Like literally everybody on the internet is live right now. I noticed. I guess I'll say there's a chance we might experiment with some other time slots. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if it's a bad idea. I've just noticed I have a tendency to choose odd times when like literally everyone out there is on. So we might diversify that. I think in the coming weeks. I'm not sure how. Maybe earlier. Maybe later. I'm not sure. I'm open to any ideas from those of you guys out there watching currently right now, which is probably, I would say, the sum total of nearly everyone that watches this channel. So if you're here right now, you're one of the few. And I don't know, we might do things a little bit. We might try it a little bit earlier. One thing I can tell you as a soft announcement, we're going to do a readings show, multidimensional tarot, probably next week, early next week, I would imagine. And then also, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be over returning to the Typical Skeptic podcast with Rob on, I think it's this Saturday. It might be Friday, but I think it's this Saturday. So join us if you want. That will be a good time to get a reading for those of you guys that show up here looking for readings. Yes, don't worry, it's coming back. We're doing it again. And I guess with that, honestly, we're not going to waste any time. We're gonna jump back into it. So for anyone that has been finding these videos, maybe you find it after the fact, maybe you're here now, maybe you'll jump in later on as we go through this long winding process. What we are doing is, once again, everyone knows this, but for those that don't, we are reading through bit by bit, chapter by chapter, experience by experience. This book that I wrote that came out it came out in 2024, Remember Your Mission. And so, yeah, we are, like I said, I'm at a loss for really where to go with the commentary on this. So we're just going to jump into it. I will preface today by saying it gets pretty weird later. I would even go so far as to say well, we'll comment on it when we get there, but this chapter and the experiences surrounding it was kind of like a preloaded experience that came to me far, far early, like years prior to me doing any of this work, at a time in my life where I think spirit, or higher self, we could even say God, if you want to use that term, some force on a higher level was sort of setting me up. They were sort of bringing individuals into my life that sort of demonstrated a certain thing, and that for better or worse, has kind of been the model for how I have learned or picked up or worked with, just many forms of energy. It was always in the observation of something, or the experiencing of it, or maybe through another person's testimony, that I made a lot of key discoveries, more so than anything that ever resembled a class or a workshop. Or I even haven't really been to hardly any retreats, which is the cool thing now, right? Some of you might have heard, there's a very high chance we're going to be doing one of those later on this year, toward the latter half of the year, or possibly at the beginning of 2027. I'm giving myself a very generous chunk of time, because it's being put together by not just me, but there's a very good chance we're going to be kind of branching off into physical training paths over the coming year, which I'm pretty excited about. There's a lot there. There's so much there that I could talk about, which I'm gonna hold off on that for the moment. But anyway, let us know if you're interested. You'll be hearing more about it if energy aligns. You will be hearing more about it in the coming months. But anyway, so what we're getting into today was kind of some preloaded experiences, and then it kind of segues into a few things that really kind of, without getting too deep into it already, really transformed my understanding of the way darkness and light actually work in this world. And we could say, quote unquote, darkness, quote unquote, light. Because what do those words really mean? It's like, depending on who you follow, who you subscribe to on YouTube, they might mean a very, very different thing, which is why I have always cringed heavily. I'll just be real. Sorry if I offend anyone at the start here. Actually, I'm not sorry. Just being honest. I hate the term light worker. I remember the very first times I heard it, and I was like, okay, light worker, okay. So, all right. And what does that mean? Does light equal holy? Does light equal good? I remember having that conversation with myself very early on in the journey, when I would sort of look at energy, or the sort of testimony or the teachings that people would put forward, and I was like, okay, so if I'm to understand this, anything that's light or bright, or we could say luminous, right, that's kind of the standard that we're existing in the new age starseed community. Anything that's bright, luminous, you know full of light is good, right. And anything, right, that's not, anything that appears dark or is not instantly of, you know what I mean, anything dark, dark equals bad, light equals good. And I have to admit, from the very, very beginning of the journey, I was like, is that really how it is? You know what I mean? Is it, does it really boil down to such a simplified mindset? And maybe it does. Those who know me know I have a tendency to either overcomplicate certain things, or to grossly oversimplify. At times there's a good middle ground, but from the very beginning, it was something that I had sort of questioned, and maybe it's because I had different experiences early on, and I remember sitting there going, okay, so if everything light is good, right? What about Lucifer? He's the light bringer, right? So does that mean Lucifer is good and holy? Because if you hold it up to that standard, or that sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, measurement, I guess, then one might go that route. You know what I mean? And for me, it was very evident early on that there were a host of many different forces that some may call negative, some may call positive, that many people, due to their programming and their sort of just what they, yeah, programming purely in most cases, were there was just this vast, maybe the wrong word, but it's almost like a pantheon of so many different shades and types of spiritual forces that connect with us in this life, that it just felt silly. Honestly, it felt surface level. It felt like the kind of conclusions that we make as children. You know what I mean? Where, oh, that's good, that equals bad. Like I remember watching somebody, sorry to launch into commentary so fast, but I remember, as you're flipping through, the bullshit on Facebook, I remember some posting from some guy, and he was all, it's a good ET craft because it moves slowly. It's not afraid of being seen. It's a bad ET if it moves quickly. And I remember like reading that, and I was like, wait, what? You know what I mean? Just the level to which we boil down simplicity, and through that lens feels childish at times. And not to go even further into it, because I'll stop here. But the reason why I'm sort of beginning with that kind of line of commentary is because that was one of the things that I discovered within the experiences that we're about to talk about. It was like I got to see both the good and the bad. And it was almost like you have to see the darkness in order to understand what the light really is. And, in order to make an educated understanding of which direction and what frequency one holds, it stands to reason that we would need to look at all sides. And I think that these were some of the experiences that gave me that perspective. And anyway, that said, let's go into it. So once again, we are back on page 237 for anyone that's following along, which is probably like nobody. But anyway, so this is a chapter called Other Lives, Other Realms, page 237. The soul is the eternal essence of who and what we are. It is the true fabric of our very being that reaches far beyond this physical realm, linking the many aspects of self that exist on numerous dimensional planes simultaneously. One of the most powerful and rapid paths toward advancement of the soul within us is through the experience of reincarnation. Some call it samsara, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. It takes place through our physical birth and death cycles in this world, and also through the development of the self during each life as well. We live and die many times as people, shedding old ways, old identities, old timelines. I had to go through a very distinct death and rebirth cycle in 2015 when my awakening journey began. It was very much like an older version or aspect of me had to die in this life so I could move forward into the one I am in now. If you look back at your own life, I am positive you will see bits and pieces of this in yourself as well. While many would consider this a gross oversimplification, like we were just talking about, of such a dense and weighty concept, it is my understanding that we all reincarnate over and over again. One of the things that has been shown to me and countless others through the journey of awakening is what many of us regard as past lives are actually parallel selves that continue to exist in other timelines and worlds. It is only in the 3D physical earth plane that we are forced to view time as a linear experience. Once we step outside of this body and into the higher realms, we inevitably see that the concepts of past, present, and future are all actually existing simultaneously. And we as earth beings agree to come here in part because the 3D experience removes this perspective and places us in a linear path. For the ensouled being, meaning those with souls, this is one of the most rapid methods of advancing our consciousness. From a higher dimensional perspective, sometimes referred to as 4D or even 5D consciousness, if you want to use, the New Age terminology, all is known and all is available. We are able to see the path before us and behind us in a very different manner than we do in physical bodies. As a result, there is little mystery as to who and what we are, the motivations of other beings, and the paths of unfoldment that are available to all during our journeys of existence. This is one of the many reasons why incarnating as a 3D physical human being in a realm like Earth is such an invaluable experience. Here we are forced to willingly forego all that knowledge in favor of entering a realm of pure cause and effect, full of karma, chance, and with no guarantees as to how it will all play out. Here we do not get to see the paths of past and future that are immediately known to those aspects of ourselves in the higher planes. In truth, that is a brilliant choice because it leaves it all up to us and the decisions we make in this life. To remove the veil of knowledge in favor of the veil of forgetting is one of the most important decisions we can make as our soul advances in its infinite journey of returning back to one. In my own life, I believe I started coming into awareness of past lives in 2009. That period of my life was long before the awakening journey that started in 2015. At the time, I was living with my ex-wife in the house we had just purchased in San Diego, California. It was the same place where only a few years later, I would go through one of the greatest changes of my entire life on Earth, which by now you have likely read in the preceding chapters of this book. I remember around that time actually meeting the first professional psychic I had ever been aware of, one of my wife's aunts by marriage, a woman named Renee, that was close to her real name, not her real name. Just as a really quick commentary, prior to publishing this book, my ex-wife, whose name I won't mention, actually wrote to me with knowledge that I was putting out this book and asked me to remove any reference to her or any of the people that I had been connected with through her family or any of that. At least that was my understanding. It was one of those, please don't mention us in any way, shape, or form, and so I can't say that I did that. I didn't, I can't say that I removed all reference of them. But what I did do, like with a lot of things, just change the names. And so, anyway, it's close enough. But a woman named Renee who came to visit us shortly after purchasing the house. In the time she spent with us, which was only a day or so, I had discovered she had been a professional psychic and healer that worked primarily with animals at the time. Supposedly, she had worked with a couple of the killer whales that were previously kept at SeaWorld that had ended up becoming violent and had to be moved to other parks or into sanctuaries due to them not being able to reacclimate to life in the ocean. From what I recall, she actually had been successful in helping at least one of them transition back into a life of freedom, which one can imagine must have been a huge undertaking. And, because I grew up in San Diego, California, I do remember seeing on the local news there where they would literally pick up these orcas in this giant, like, I don't know if it was a crane or something inside this big thing, and they would like move them over into this mini tank. And it seemed like a horribly traumatic process for these animals. I mean, just absolutely, traumatic. And so it was interesting to note that this person had been connected to that stuff. And some of you guys out there will remember there was a famous orca that I think had killed a trainer or something like that. And I'm pretty sure this lady was one of the people that ended up working with it to try to calm it down or bring healing. And from my understanding, they were successful in this. And so during her short visit with us, we got to talking, and I asked her a bit about the work she did. She was mostly non-committal and seemed disinterested in speaking about herself, which was odd. I do recall that. I really wanted to know. I remember hearing that this woman was a psychic, and I was like, "Whoa, really? Wow, wow. Okay, yeah. Can you tell me about it?" And she was like, um yeah, like just kind of like, yeah, all right, I guess, you know, seemed pretty disinterested in speaking about herself, but did divulge a bit about what she knew about past lives. It was the first time I had heard something that many of us now take for granted in the spiritual communities, that we tend to reincarnate in groups. And each time we return, we often switch roles in each immediate family. She talked about how we chose our parents and our bodies to a large extent, and even certain conditions that we will endure along the way. And I'll pause there to say that, nowadays within, if you want to call it spiritual community, whatever word you want to call it, that's common knowledge. You know what I mean? For a lot of people, it's something that we've kind of come to accept as being, a reality. Or at least a certain number of us have, which I do believe to be an absolute truth. We absolutely incarnate in soul groups, and many of us come here together in many sort of overlapping kind of family units and frequency groups, and it's based upon a number of different kind of experiences and things that are slated to take place in our life, who we've been in other lives. And it is very, very true, at least from my experience, that we do tend to shift places with those in our family. We do tend to switch. It sounds funny to say it this way. Some people will be like, no, we don't. We switch genders in other lives a lot of times. You'll come, do a few lives as a male, you'll switch over to a female. We will become our parents at certain stages, which, isn't necessarily a thing that we need to go super deep into here, because a lot of you guys already know this. But for me in 2009, it was kind of the first times where I was like, really sitting there going, huh, really? It was like it was reaching me in a little bit of a different way. And so I remember my son Bailey coming in from playing outside while she was there. He was maybe 7, 8 years old at the time. She looked at him, looked back at me, and said something along the lines of, "You two have been coming back here together for a very long time." I had no knowledge of such things at that time of my life, but her words hit me like an arrow right in the heart. I remember feeling it in this immeasurably deep way that I had no words for at the time. It was like the very cells in my body instantly knew it was true. For some reason, the questions I asked her that day seemed to affect her as well. And for some odd reason, I requested that she meet with me privately later on so I could ask her more questions about it all, which was really weird. I just want to mention this. It was weird. I could tell that everyone was like, really? Why do you want to why do you want to talk to her? Like, oh, really? You want to talk to my aunt so and so? It was almost like this, like I was dumb for asking in this weird way, but I was shocked. I mean, it was one of those statements that, is so simplistic now, but at the time I was like, I looked at my son and I was like, you could just feel it. It was like in that moment I could see it in a way that I could not have conceptualized it previously. And I just knew it. I knew it absolutely, absolutely to be true. And so, to my surprise, she agreed. And about 3 weeks later, I want to say maybe more, to be more correct, might have been a month. Honestly, it was longer than I would have liked, because, there was sort of, at the time there was like this urgency where I wanted to, I want to ask you all these questions, and there was just time, and I could tell she was willing, but not that into it. And so, to my surprise, she agreed. And about 3 weeks later, she returned again. And we met at a park somewhere in the Poway neighborhood of San Diego, which coincidentally is where I went to high school. It's part of San Diego that I lived in for many years, too many years. The truth is, I remember very little of that meeting now, but she was gracious in receiving my questions. I asked her about animal communication, past lives, and a lot more. It was not a reading she gave me. It was more of a deep conversation where she told me bits about how we come back here again and again. We live many lives, even in this one body, and often go through very intense death and rebirth cycles during our time on earth. She was adamant that this process was natural to each of us, depending on what it is we choose to heal, face, or overcome in this life. In her case, she had been forced to live through several bouts of nearly life ending cancers and seemed to come out of each one in a whole new form. There was a lot more to our meeting, and it's funny looking back now what a seemingly random thing it was at the time. Yet the effects of this encounter still sit with me to this very day, which is literally true. It was the first time I had been taught about animal communication. It was the first time I got to sit with a person who specialized in that and literally watch her talk to crows and literally gain information from them. And it seemed as though in that experience, and I might reference this again in a few moments in a redundant way, but it was more of a transfer of energy. And I don't mean anything like ability or knowledge. It was just like someone opening up a box for me to look at from a slight distance. You know, you can look at it across the table and go, whoa, that's amazing. So that's real. Yeah, that's real. You know what I mean? Where someone's talking about the thing that they're beholding and you're like, and you can just feel that it was. And anyway, let's get back to it. There was a lot more to our meeting, and it's funny looking back now what a seemingly random thing it was at the time. Yet the effects of this encounter still sit with me to this very day. In a strange sudden memory, I was reminded during the writing of this book that I had actually reached out to her via email years later in 2015 when my sudden activation started. For those of you guys that recall the early parts of this book, it was during the stage where I was absolutely out of my mind. I mean, the height of Kundalini explosion madness. It was right about the week that fire came out of my hand and I could not stop myself from blending into other people's energy fields. It was honestly, I'd say this all the time. It was absolutely horrible. It was not romantic or sexy or cool. I was absolutely traumatized by it. And at that stage, I was coming into acceptance of the fact that I had lost my mind and that I was going to need some kind of help or some kind of thing. And I remember thinking, how long is this going to last? How long can I keep pretending to be normal like this? And so that was actually right around the time I had written to her, because honestly, she was one of the only people where I was like, maybe they'll understand, and you're like, and so I recall sending her a manic, sprawling, multi-thousand word email about all I had been going through in that period. And she replied very simply, I mean, probably way too simply, stating something along the lines of, hang in there. This will all make sense in the future. Whatever you do not go back on your medication. That was almost pretty much the only thing she wrote. It was just like, hey, stop, hold on, take a breath, hang in there. You're gonna be okay. Just like, okay, just chill. Basically, that was the email that I got. And in truth, her message blew right over my head. I had no ability to receive it at the time and was hoping for someone to give total meaning to everything I was going through. I remember reading it and just casting it aside. I really was so scattered at the time. She would have had to have been there face to face to even hold my attention for more than 10 seconds. It really was that wild. In the coming years, as everything changed in my world and I entered an entirely new stage of purpose, I began to understand these things in a very new manner. And in truth, there was nothing she could do at the time. I think she knew this in her own way. I think looking back on it, this was a person that was smart enough to know, like, okay, this guy's gone through some kind of an event, whether it was a mental illness thing or whether it was something involving, actual energy. I think that she had enough foresight to be like, you'll be all right, kid, chill out, that sort of thing. And so there was really nothing she could do. And I think she knew this in her own way. When I began doing professional readings, I learned that many people hold tremendous amounts of past life data, or what I often call alternate selves, in their faces and eyes. In fact, just by staring into your own eyes in the mirror, there he goes with the mirror work again, you can begin to read little bits of this data for yourself. I still absolutely believe in that. The mirror gazing process of looking into the eyes for an extended period of time, it definitely will bring results. I think one of the things is that not that many people will practice it at this stage of the game. Not that many people are willing to continually attempt a process. I think one of the shortcomings of the starseed kind of social groups is that we sort of expect some other power to do it for us. Some ET or spiritual force is going to show up and just do it for you. And when the reality is, for a lot of people beginning to understand these things, there's a concerted effort and acts of determination and follow through that are often entirely necessary to actually cause an energy to root within the body and begin to be expressed in a new way. That can apply to knowledge, that applies to abilities, that applies to many different areas of intuitive development. It's a thing we must continually practice. And so you can get tremendous amounts of data through the eyes. There was a period of time in the very beginning. It's funny because I was thinking about this today. I might go back to doing that where I would have people want a reading and I would say, first, send me a picture of your eyes. I just need a picture of your eyes. Just send me a picture of your eyes. And my God, there's so much data that comes through. Sometimes it's too much, and I think that in itself can be distracting. I think it really depends upon the individual. I would say that nearly every single person I've encountered, upon really looking into certain areas of their eyes and feeling what comes forth, you can gain usable data about a person's energy field or their life. But I tend to rely more on the voice. The voice, for some reason. Anyway, let's get back to it. I still find myself looking into people's eyes in readings. I do this every day. This is kind of me giving up one of my weird little things that I do with people. I still find myself looking into people's eyes in readings and defocusing my gaze to begin receiving this information. And while for some it will be highly confusing at first, with repeated attempts, you'll often feel like you're slipping into a daydream or into the world of imagination within you. It will help you greatly to write down a question as well, as simply as possible. In fact, my recommendation is to write by hand on a piece of paper something like, please show me who I have been in other realms. That's just an example. Place that handwritten note in front of you or near you and state your intention out loud. Literally, say it out loud. Make a declaration. State your intention out loud as you begin this process. And be sure to spend at least 10 to 15 full minutes eye gazing into your own eyes in the mirror. I'll talk more about it in a second from the text, but this is a very vulnerable process for some people. Some people will lock into it quickly. Other people have a really hard time with it. If it is your first time doing so, please have patience and simply allow your head to run wild the first few times. This is necessary for some. Yes, it sounds cliche, but the eyes really are portals to the soul. And if you allow your imagination to run its course, you will inevitably begin breaking through the layers of programming to a space within you that at first will feel like something you're making up. It is important to push past this and stop analyzing yourself. There are many layers of thought forms that we must learn to sift through before we begin perceiving truth within us. And for some, this process can take quite a lot of practice before you yield any substantial results. What I'm saying here is that there are layers of the mind's eye. The third eye itself, especially in the early stages when we begin to intentionally and deliberately practice processes of, just opening that up. It's not that there's some specific number of layers, but we can have countless layers of thought forms, unacknowledged emotions, Unacknowledged desires is a really, really big one. People that have a lot of feelings that they try to hide. You'll feel a certain way about people or places or things. You try to suppress it within yourself, and it kind of leads one into, roads of mental wandering, as we do within the mind's eye. And so there's a lot of layers of the mind's eye, and what I've noticed is for many people that begin starting out on the path of intuitive development, or let's say specifically looking into past lives, and we start out doing this mirror gazing thing, it's really, really easy to just fall into the noise within the mind, because especially when you set out that space of silence, human consciousness has just this tendency to fill it in, right? An empty space, your mind's going to fill it in with thoughts, desires, imaginatory things, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But that's why it takes time to really push past those layers. And I always say, if you feel like you're making it up in the beginning, that's critically important. You must have that experience. You must have the experience to give yourself a comparison for when things come through a different way. And I think we've been taught, for those of us that kind of, maybe work with other people, where we've been taught to ignore, the imagination. And I actually believe the imagination is the true gateway to intuitive understanding and creation. In fact, it's absolutely necessary. But the more we can drain out just the thought forms and the unacknowledged noise from the mind's eye, the better you will do. And so if you're one of those people that hears this and begins gazing at yourself in the mirror, be ready for a lot of vulnerable feelings. Be ready to look at yourself, and within 2-3 minutes, maybe less, go, what the hell am I even doing this for? This is so stupid. Why am I doing this? It doesn't even work. Your mind will take you in every single direction other than the one it needs to go in the beginning. And that's just part of it. That's how it's going to be. I'm not saying for every single person, because there's a lot of other people that can just lock in, and that's beautiful when you can. There's always an exception. So some people might practice this for months and never achieve anything. Another thing, this is me getting back to the writing here. Another thing you can do, and this is real, it's tried and true, it's very old, it doesn't come from me. Another thing you can do is candle gazing, which is an amazing multi-purpose tool for refining your psychic perception. Get one of those big 3-day candles and spend at least 15 minutes a day, or as long as you can, staring into the flame in a darkened room. And I mean directly into the flame of the candle. As you're doing so, allow it to sort of allow yourself to focus your eyes, almost as if you're going a little bit cross-eyed and you're trying to pull energy up toward your third eye. Doesn't mean pull your eyes cross-eyed, just allow your eyes to kind of float and keep them focused, and you'll notice that an imprint or a singular image will be imprinted on your eyes in front of you. And not that that's absolutely necessary. The idea is that the candle is a portal, and every lit candle on the earth plane with intention, mind you that word, with intention, is going to open up something that it links to innumerable realms, innumerable planes. There are literal people who have walked the earth as spiritual teachers who will only show up in your life upon candle gazing. Believe that. I mean, absolute truth. It's almost like for some people, beings or souls wait within the gateway created by the candle. Anyway, I'll pause there and we'll read through it. Some of this I'll read again in a second, but in truth, if you really want this to take hold, you're going to need much more time than that. You know what I mean? And it needs to become a thing that we are willing to engage in, if not on a daily basis, as much as you can. And if you can do it on a daily basis, there is a great benefit to those who absolutely throw themselves into this. I've said it in a cheesy way a million times, but it's like when you do that, when you jump off the cliff, when you devote yourself to sitting there and gazing into the eyes or staring into that candle with that earnest desire to experience or open yourself to other realms, it's like the true spirits, the guides that are alongside us, they sense it, they see it, they know it. And I always do this weird thing, but they're like, come on, they're actually doing it. You know what I mean? They notice when we are engaging in this process. And over a period of time, you will notice things change dramatically. I say that firsthand as a person that has spent honestly far too much time. You'd either be really impressed or very worried if you knew how much. One or the other, probably not both, or maybe both. Anyway, to actually experience a noticeable change, it needs to be a regular practice. And for those truly devoted, be ready to spend 30 minutes to an hour several times a week if you can carve out this time. But I try to be realistic. I understand that not everyone will have the same level of commitment, devotion, and especially time to truly invest in exploring this process. I know for me, I was so lost at that stage. Like I was so confused and lost and out of my mind that I was like, sure, yeah, I'll spend 2 hours. I could do 2 hours. What was the alternative for me? It was, really nothing. Maybe dissociating, or I have no idea. And so I think for some, candle gazing may be easier to grab onto than mirror work. They both have their own flavor, though, so go with whatever seems to work better for you. I'd try them both and see how you feel. In the case of candle gazing, my advice is to also write down a question. Read it out loud. Once again, read it out loud. And then simply stare into the flame itself. You will notice after a time how your mind's eye will seem to be pulled toward the flickering flame. And for those who get that far, this is a sign that something within you is opening up. Stay with this process. Stare into the candle and just allow what arises within you. For those who really want to go for it, my recommendation is to make candle gazing a permanent practice for you. And whenever I do any kind of spiritual work or readings, I will always have a candle burning to one side of me or in the background, literally every single time. I'm not saying that that is an absolute necessity. It's a practice that I have come to adopt in every single moment in which I'm connecting, doing this work, engaging in it on any level. There will always be a candle. More than likely, there will be incense as well. And, once again, it's not that you have to have that, but creating the set and setting of the so-called sacred space is absolutely critical. Some people will disagree with me, but I am not a believer that spiritual work on a dedicated level should ever be done in your car or at work in your cubicle, or, what I mean, walking down the road. It just doesn't work. We have to create, well, I will correct that. It can work. It certainly can. It's not the most optimal way to do it. So anyway, I'll shut up there. Let's get back to it. And so, where were we? Yes. For those who really want to go for it, my recommendation is to make candle gazing a permanent practice for you. And whenever I do any kind of spiritual work or readings, I will always have a candle burning to one side of me or in the background. This is because candles are also portals, like I just mentioned, just like your eyes. And if you're willing to cultivate a relationship with the candle, a relationship with the flame, I know that sounds odd or cringe to some people, and I could not be more serious. You are creating a relationship with this thing that you perceive and stare into. Place your gaze and your energy upon every day or as often as you can. Just in the process of doing so, you're going to be creating some form of an energetic entanglement and what some may call a relationship with it. However, there's a different thing that takes place when you go into that with the intention of, like, I am creating a relationship with this living essence, this gateway that I have created. This is the intention that I'm using for it. You know what I mean? You're placing intention, you're placing meaning behind it, you're stating it out loud, you're writing it down, and then you're engaging in a process of focusing intensely upon it. And so, where are we here? Okay, just like your eyes. And if you're willing to cultivate a relationship with the candle, you'll be helping your body learn to connect with the countless energetic portals in our world that are available to all who truly seek to open these doors within themselves. You will find many practitioners of spirit talk about candle work. It's very old news. You know what I mean? It doesn't come from me. This is something that's been around for ages, ages, and ages. Some believe that whenever a candle is lit in the world, it is linked with all others through a vast network of energy that passes through the eternal flame, represented by the flame itself. Think of it like the mycelium network that links fungi throughout the earth. For those of you guys that are familiar with mycelium, they're all linked. And so to make this past life or alternate self-discovery process a little simpler for those who have not yet begun meditating, doing mirror work, candle gazing, or really anything else, there is also a bit of a cheat code you can turn to that will nearly always give you at least a piece or two of data about a person. And this will sound oversimplified. Get ready. Some people out there can be like, oh, really? All right. But I'm being absolutely real. Ask yourself, what am I naturally good at? Or if you're discerning that for another person, ask them, well, what are they naturally good at? What were you naturally drawn to? Meaning, what skills and abilities did you seem to naturally gravitate to in this life? Each of us will have been inexplicably drawn in a seemingly natural manner towards certain subjects, time periods, even certain fears, phobias, karmic events, and avoidances. I would say, especially for those that are looking for ways in which, we might have met certain ends on other, timelines, your fears, like some of your most deepest mortal fears, will have a connection with recent lives that you've had where you may have passed in somewhat of a frightening way, and you'll come into this life with a little bit of energy hangover from it. And it's very normal. It's an absolutely normal thing. So much of that energy carries and persists from one lifetime to the next. It shows up in different ways depending on, what it is, who the individual is. All kinds of things. There's so many variables when it comes to that, which is why I often get a little bit sort of, I don't know. I often question people that seem to have such firm and clear understanding of everything you did in a past life. It's like almost like well, it's almost as if the majority of that is meant to be discerned by the beholder themselves. And anyway, there's a lot more I could say, but let's keep going. All of these things will give you a bit of usable data about who you've been, what you were involved in, and even where it may be leading you. I really do think that is one of the most simple ways to understand more about who you've been in other lives. It is inevitable when I explore these things with people in sessions, we find that many of us are already involved in or drawn to certain areas of interest or career paths, ideas, etc., that are all directly related to the many other selves that are still in existence throughout their own timelines. And so I'll say it once again, for those that are trying to understand, what were you doing? Who were you in your other lives? Look at your deepest heart's desires in this life. Look at the things that you were instantly good at as a child, maybe as an adult. If you ever had a thing, you picked it up and you're like, oh, I kind of just started doing that thing. I don't know, It doesn't mean it's the be all end all, because we will reintroduce ourselves to many facets of previous selves throughout this life. They can show up as, stints in certain career paths or, areas of learning. It shows up in so many different ways. And anyway, let's keep going. I'm going to pause in a little bit if there's any questions. So if anybody has questions, let me know. This is a bit of a shorter chapter today. So the good news is it won't be 3 hours. Or maybe the bad news for those of you guys that like hanging out 3 hours, which I think there's a couple, maybe 2 or 3. But anyway, let's get back to it. To make it a little weirder, from what I have experienced within myself and many others, it is also absolutely possible you can and often will reincarnate throughout time. And in this process of discovery, you will likely find versions of you that are existing on future timelines as well as past ones. I think for some of us, that can be one of the most confusing parts, because we are taught that our world is one linear point A to point B journey. and it will feel impossible that you may have reincarnated here in this world from a future timeline. Myself and many others who traveled along their own versions of this path of discovery will have also come to very similar conclusions in their own way. I can assure you we are only scratching the surface of what is possible in this area. And so before we go forward, I'll say it again. Yes, you incarnate from the future all the time. This is not something that is outside of the realm of possibility. I believe it's far more common than we might think. Now, how much of that future timeline knowledge chronologically applies to the here and now, what's allowed to get, brought over, what's relevant is another thing. But let's continue. As with most things in the psychic realm, I have relied primarily upon my own methods of learning how to discern past life information for myself and others. Like I've stated several times already, I did not have any formal training in this line of work. Not that one even exists to begin with. I have been educated almost entirely by my guides and those who have assisted in unseen form in my life since this strange journey began on a professional level in 2017. I will always publicly admit that. As long as I have continued to trust and devote myself to this practice, they have never let me down. Not once, not ever. Like ever, ever. I pray that the work I have created through this book and in my own life will stand as a testament to those who have helped me along the way and the authenticity of the relationship I have built with Spirit since embarking on this path. There are also a number of modalities, practitioners, and friends I've encountered along the way who have greatly assisted me in remembering who and what it was I chose to do with my time on Earth. This is where we get into the interesting part. One of the most meaningful and expansive of those experiences took place in September of 2023 when I had my first QHHT session given to me by a man known as Drago Reed. A lot of you guys know Drago. You've heard of him. I know people have opinions about him. Some love him, some don't. It doesn't matter. He gave me an incredible QHHT session that had a deep effect on me. But I also want to be really straight up about something which might sound a little strange to say. It was an experience that I was going to have in the way that I had it, regardless of who it was. It was like my soul and those that were connected with me were so ready to talk about all the things that had gone on and all the lives that I had lived. And it was weird because I had no idea what to expect out of it. And it was really shown to me. It was like, it was just time for this. It wasn't necessarily about the who and what or where and under what conditions it was. It didn't matter if I paid for it or if someone just gifted it to me and I hung out at their house for an afternoon. It didn't matter what it was. It was like it was time. It was time for it to take place. And so for those who may not be aware, QHHT stands for Quantum Hypnosis Healing Technique. It's a deeply hypnotic past life regression and healing modality created by Dolores Cannon, which most of us know by now, that involves taking a person into what is referred to as a somnambulistic state of consciousness, often experienced as being in a deep trance, quite similar to the theta or even delta brainwave state, just at the very edge of unconsciousness. Within this state, the practitioner will guide the client through visualization practices and hypnotic deepeners toward reconnecting with other lives by having them speak through their experience while under a deep trance. This allows one to effectively bypass the conscious mind and connect directly with what many call the higher self or the spirit guides that assist us in this human life. In my own journey, QHHT was something I had been aware of for many years, but had never really taken the time to explore. I had heard mostly very good and often quite amazing things about it, but I've also had my own criticisms. I noticed early on in the work I do that connecting to past lives didn't actually take a 4-hour deep trance journey into other realms, Much of that information can often be gathered through other means. I also know it is possible to connect with and bring someone into a trance state very effectively online, sometimes far easier when done online. And there is, in reality, no need to physically be in the room with that person. In fact, I do it nearly every day in my own work. Having said that, there is one thing it does for those who engage in it that I believe to be absolutely priceless. It allows one to re experience certain aspects of other lives through their own eyes, in their own body, in a way that I believe can facilitate far greater healing for some rather than just learning these things through the lens of another psychic perception. In early September 2023, I drove out to Drago's house in Florida for a QHHT session, which was really just like half an hour away from my house. It wasn't like some journey. I was like, oh, he only lives like half an hour, 40 minutes away. All right. I really didn't know what to expect, but I was willing to completely give myself over to whatever needed to be known or seen. I have always believed in allowing certain things to occur in their own timing. It's not that I was overly resistant to a past life regression. In fact, I had done a few already, but they hadn't really yielded relevant results. And I think in hindsight, it was largely because I wasn't fully ready to open that part of myself, or maybe it just wasn't the right time. I remember laying down on his little couch in what looked like a side room attached to the kitchen. It was immaculately decorated with a very unique style of tattoo artistry, movie props, plants, the whole 9 yards. It's always really interesting to see the ways in which one's personality leaks through into how they design their home environment. It's funny though, because if you were to look at my home, you would see literally still to this day, blank walls and nothing but a few random items that I use regularly. A very different, quite minimalist vibe. I think I am very minimalist in that sense. As we began our regression process, he guided me into a place that would serve as a hub or a launching point for where my energy needed to go. After some visualization and deepening, I was amazed to find myself in a place that looked very much like, get ready, for those who haven't read this, I was amazed to find myself in a place that looked very much like the Tyrell Corporation from the movie Blade Runner. For those who are not familiar, imagine a large, lowly lit room with dim golden light coming through blinds or slits in the wall. It was a place of stillness and silence, golden in color, but also dark in its own way that gave the feeling of safety rather than uncertainty of what may lay in the shadows. It was a clean space, void of all life other than my own. From here, I was taken into a realm that I had been to in several dreams over the years. It was an organic world in which a number of beings, both human and non-human, live in between physical lives. It became one of the first entry points for the cycles of incarnation here on Earth for myself and others. While this world has both land and water within its terrain, the majority of physical beings lived above the surface of a warm, black ocean in these platform-like dwelling spaces that have been built above the surface of the water. The structures were very rounded and soft in a way that defies explanation here on Earth, almost as if they were originally formed by the planet itself rather than deliberately constructed by human or other hands. It seems when it came time to enter new realms or leave this one behind, we would choose to dive down into the water, into the blackness beneath us. On the journey down into the depths, one would eventually come to a light or a portal within that void space that would then be the doorway into a new realm. This had served as an entry point for me in many lives, and it was a place where I would go in between incarnations to prepare for other physical lives throughout the cosmos. It seems as though many of us will spend time in these in-between places as we move in and out of physical lives here on Earth and other realms. It was a place in which I encountered the soul of my mother Rachel, who seemed to have a very well-formed aspect of herself that inhabits this place and even served as a mother-like figure for other people in this realm. As one would descend into the black ocean, we would do so with knowledge that we were leaving behind our physical body and essentially bringing oneself into a new form. There was no fear or sadness in doing so, but no real celebration either. It felt like a normal aspect of life there, and no one would second guess the process. It's just what we did. As I sunk down into the void space of black liquid inside that planet, I emerged into the body of a version of myself that seemed to be living in what appeared to be the early to mid 1800s, in a place that looked just like the time period we call the Old West in the United States, which sounds kind of silly to some people. To other people, it's like, yeah, totally. It was like that was where I came out. I came out in this like Old West kind of like cowboy world, which I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna talk a lot more about it in a second. I never it was like I've never been I would not like I was not into those, you know what I mean? I was never into it, and that was the life that showed up, which was very interesting. That was boom. The first one that I went into was looked like 18 early, I would say early mid 1800s in the Old West. As I entered that world, I found myself just on the edge of death. I had been walking along the side of a dirt road toward what appeared to be my home in that life and had been shot in the back by 3 men who came galloping by on horseback. I could feel the blood leaving my body and could smell the land, the flowers, and the terrain around me. Everything in this place was so alive. I could feel every living cell as I clung to what little life was left in this body. As we questioned why this life was being shown to me, a very particular series of events unfolded. This was a life in which I had lived an incarnation of pure self-will. I had been one of the leaders of some kind of a gang or a criminal syndicate. There was little to no law during this time period, and we used it to our advantage by becoming both law enforcement and also the criminal element at the same time. It seems I had been an extremely violent person in this time period and would engage in extreme acts of intimidation, extortion, torture, murder, and even a number of strange religious practices that actually appeared to be rituals to ancient gods and entities that existed throughout time and space. It was one of the first incarnations in which I became aware of what some call words of power, which was essentially a way of casting spells upon others using the power of speech and artful manipulation through communication. It appears that in this time period, I had come into contact with a force of energy that had come to me in other lives. It appeared to be a network of ancient beings that lent their energy and guidance to those willing to go to truly extreme measures of exacting control upon one another. Some might call them ancient demons, others may call them gods. One thing we do know is that they still exist in our world to this very day, and in my opinion, are only a few of countless hyperdimensional forces, all vying for influence over our human realm. To make it even more complicated, not all of them are actually evil, but we are often taught as so by the control structure created by worldly religions. It seems in this life I had made contact with them through acts of extreme evil I was willing to engage in, and even lived for a time as what some would call a preacher of sorts. We began to minister to others and would often take people through elaborate healing rituals and prayers that would lead them into healing, but also bound them to the negative forces that would then consume their life essence and give us the mere droppings of what was left behind. With even those small bits of energy, we were able to build a vast criminal network that spanned across many regions and took the lives of countless people while also consuming their energy, their riches, and every single thing they had built or become in that life. After a time of living as a false preacher in this life, I eventually transitioned into becoming something of a gang leader by today's standards and lived the main bulk of that life cycle running this criminal syndicate alongside a few others I had recruited and been with along the journey. It seems as with most cycles such as this, it was short-lived. And by the time the government had organized into a more fully formed law enforcement agency, I chose to get out of that life and eventually became what many would call a doctor. I even performed a number of surgeries and saved many lives of those who came to me for help. It was all done, however, under the guidance of the negative entities I had communed with in that life. And while it led to liberation for some, still many others had been bound into darkness unknowingly by the energy I brought into their lives. As one would imagine, this eventually did catch up to me. And this is where the greatest lessons in this life had been dealt. I was eventually betrayed by the very people who I had built this criminal empire with years earlier, and prior to my death, had been given many warnings to stop practicing medicine, to leave the region in which I had been living, and to willingly give back a small hoard of gold that I had taken from a number of people over the years. While the hoard of gold was nearly gone by that time, there were also a number of ancient spiritual artifacts that I had used as ritual objects to bring in the entities and beings who worked with us during that time period. It seems some of them were of Templar origin, meaning they had not only been brought to our continent by the Knights Templar, but had also been used by them on their own missions throughout the world to connect with a host of non-physical beings. These were objects of power that linked us to other realms, and when it was discovered that they were in my possession, a contract was put on my head for the return of these items at any cost necessary. The only items from that life I can recall, and it's funny because I can see them every single time I say this. It was almost like in the experience that I recall from this QHHT thing, I was like holding them. The only items from that life I can recall are a small, curved, Middle Eastern looking dagger, a palm-sized emerald green crystal skull, and a series of scrolls that were not like medieval scrolls. They were like these rolled up wads of paper. And yeah, they were inside like what was like a leather sheath, for like a sword, but it was like a container with a lid, and we had stuffed all these papers and things inside there. And the day in which I had been brought back to that body was the day of my death in that life cycle. I had chosen to live by the sword and die by the sword, or in this case, by the gun. I watched myself walking down a country road toward the house I lived in with my wife and 2 children at the time. A group of 3 men rode up behind me that I knew very well. We had been together at many stages in the past, but I had not seen them in some time. As they rode up behind me, they called out to me, and before I could turn around to greet them, they raised their guns and shot me several times. As I fell to the ground, I could feel the life leaving me instantly, but was given enough strength to stand back up and walk down the road a few more feet until I collapsed on the side of the road just before entering the roadway that led up to a small hill upon which I had been living in the midst of a small cornfield that surrounded our home. I had received the just rewards of my time in that life and left that world knowing I had made the wrong choices. I remember seeing my 2 children running across the field with my wife at the time, and I was grateful to get to die in their presence. It seems after that moment, all their possessions were ransacked, stolen. The large stores of gold were brought to whoever had put the contract out on my life. I do believe it was somehow agents of the Knights Templar, Freemasons, or some other long-standing spiritual order that had persisted across continents and served as a major hidden hand controlling certain elements of the populace at that time. Along with the spoils of war and crime I had amassed in that life cycle, I was also shown a series of scrolls that I had stolen from a ship that had been docked somewhere along the east coast of the United States and had been attacked by a group of Native American tribes that had a seething hatred toward colonizers and foreign invaders from other continents. It seems this ship had been commissioned by the Knights Templar and was one of many missions throughout the world that were much more common in that time period than we have been led to believe in our history books. Those scrolls contain some of the words of power we used to bind and control others in that time period. In fact, I had learned to read in part through those very writings. They seem to have an ability to activate one's consciousness, hyper-focus the mind, and allow new information to enter the body at an astonishing pace. It led to a massive change in my consciousness that I was not ready to deal with in that life. One might even call them magic words or spells, and they were used to great effect. I'll pause there to say that based on what I was shown within that life cycle, I was actually shown how to read through my experience of discovering these things and connecting with spirit. I do believe, at least I was shown in that life cycle, there was a lot of Native American involvement. There was a series of other experiences that I had been shown where we had worked with a certain, I don't know what tribe it is, a Native American tribe at that time. And there was like some path of learning that some of us had gone through, which at that time was somewhat medical in nature, but I was taught through my experiences with them and through these items that we had literally stolen. It was like something changed me. I do believe that life was shown to me because it was one of those experiences sort of similar to this life, although much, much different, in which it's just something occurred. And as a result, consciousness was changed. Our abilities were changed. Suddenly you knew how to do things that you had never been taught. And, you know, for those that aren't aware, at that time period, especially in like the 1800s, people were not reading. It was very rare. It was very uncommon for people to be able to read during that time period. And so it was a profound thing. I do believe that in me learning how to read and sort of hyper focusing the mind and working with these forces in that life, there was a lot of success and I guess we could say just riches, although I don't believe that it took that form in exorbitant riches and exorbitant lifestyle. It was more easy come, easy go, I think, for me in that incarnation. And it's funny. I mean, even when I look at it now, I don't really feel good about it. You know what I mean? It's one of those experiences that I think shows you where you've been and who you've been and how far you've come from where you were during those periods. Not that one needs to necessarily differentiate themselves or create, you know, some sort of distance between those other selves. Although some people in the Starseed community will hear that and go, "Oh, a negative being in other lives." Oh, you know what I mean? There's a tremendous path of learning that comes with allowing oneself to remember those types of experiences, but we'll get back to it here. After that QHHT session, it seems a channel had been left open within me somehow. I continued to connect with that incarnation in my own meditations and was shown that some of these words of power were actually an offshoot of the ancient language that made up the capsule phrases I've spoken about in earlier parts of this book. Sounds crazy to some people. The difference was these were more negatively aligned and led to destruction rather than opening of pathways within the energy body. Some could be used to stop hearts, close down senses, or cast hallucinations and visions into the minds of those we opposed. During that lifetime, I had become so skilled with them, I weaved them into conversation, sent them in letters, and even began guiding others in their use for the same purposes. Before I read the next paragraph, I will also say that other lives that were shown to me were at just different periods in which, we had used it's almost like I'm not supposed to talk about that. That is wild. I will just say we had used these sort of phrases of destruction to such a shocking degree that there was a incarnation that I was shown during, I won't even say what time period it was, in which one of the duties I had as a practitioner was putting together a group of people and systematically shutting down every organ in a person's body by hyper focusing upon one organ at a time with a group of people. And it was a process that led to essentially political assassination. Or I'll just put it this way: the for some reason I'm being prompted not to go into detail on this. Members of I'll say a royal family. That there was a life in which we used these to literally assassinate members of a royal family by just focusing energy upon people and just shutting down the organs one after another. And it was like, what? Whoa, you know what I mean? Which is funny because you look at like the work that I do in this life, and it's like the opposite, which I do believe is a fundamental experience that one will get to have when you go through these life cycles. It's like you get to be the bad guy and you get to be the good guy, which sounds silly to some, you know what I mean? A gross oversimplification to others. In the next paragraph, we're going to talk about something crazy. I'm going to try to limit the commentary on it. I have actually been judged for this experience, believe it or not. I have told people about this experience I'm about to mention, and I have been judged for just talking about it, just saying like, hey, this is an experience I had. And it's shocking. It's shocking to think that, but so specific that, anyway, I'm just beating around the bush. In the following months, something very strange occurred in my life. I was contacted in a dream state over a period of 3 to 4 days by two spirits that claimed to have been allied with me during that life cycle. Before I go to the next sentence, I will say there have been only a mere handful of times in this human journey in which I have encountered a spiritual form or an entity and was given such a pronounced identity, a literal name, a literal form. It was like unbelievable. And I'm not saying good. I'm just saying like it was so specific that it was like one of those first times where I was like, oh my God, okay, so a doorway really did open. And now here we are, you know what I mean? And so I was contacted in a dream state over a period of 3 to 4 days by two spirits that claimed to have been allied with me during that life cycle. One was named Osiris, the other Zagan. Both of them appeared separately, about a day apart from each other, and we had a series of conversations that truly blew my mind. That sentence alone is a gross understatement. It was something that even to this day, I have a hard time articulating the experience that came with it. Not because it was so high level and full of all kinds of data, because it was very dark and it was very just not the places that I think most of us within this community ever imagining themselves going into, you know. And anyway, I'm not going to talk around it. We'll just go into it. Both of them appeared separately, about a day apart, maybe 2-3 days apart. It was very short. I mean, like one and then the other came very, very quickly. Both of them appeared separately, about a day apart from each other, and we had a series of conversations that truly blew my mind. It was as if a voice suddenly overtook my entire dreamscape, and everything around me stopped dead in its tracks, almost like someone hit the pause button on the entire world around me and then began speaking. Both of them announced their names up front, immediately upon appearing, which is a highly rare thing to experience. There was never a visual aspect. It was as if we spoke internally and through the fabric of the dream realm in a way that I do not know how to accurately convey. It was as if it was a conversation, but not a conversation. It was an experience, but also a conversation. It was like, and I'm not saying like a download, it was almost like a journey that I went on without really even knowing that I was agreeing to go on a journey, which sounds kind of scary and sort of weird, and it was. But just unlike anything that I have ever experienced. And, once again, I don't say this from this like, wow, amazing perspective. I say this from a place of respect and honestly straight up danger. And well, I'll get to it. I'm front loading, but like evil, just straight up evil. And so both of them announced their names up front immediately upon appearing, which is a highly rare thing to experience. There was never a visual aspect. It was as if we spoke internally through the fabric of the dream realm in a way that I do not know how to accurately convey. When it first happened, it was so deeply intense that I didn't speak about it with a single person for weeks. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there. And I remember her asking me, "Are you okay?" And I just was like, huh? When you're just like in this other world and you're kind of dissociated, well, totally dissociated. You're just like, what? It would just, I like shook, straight up shook me. And so I didn't speak about it with a single person for weeks. The truth is, I actually didn't really talk about it, period, until I started writing this book. This book was the first time where I was like, am I going to kind of tell some of that? People are going to get really weird. Yeah, we're going to tell it. Because I know I'm not the only one. I know that I am not the only one that has had this type of experience. When it first happened, it was so deeply intense, I didn't speak about it with a single person for weeks. So much knowledge was passed on during these conversations and pieces of experiences from other lives, realms, and timelines that it might take a whole other book to accurately convey my still growing understanding of it all. I don't even know if I'm ever even supposed to talk about it. I don't know if it's even meaningful on a public level to dive into just the things. It was like, I'll just say it. I got to be shown all of the darker elements of everything that I had done and been. And it was like, who was there and why? And maybe not why. Let me correct that. There was no answer as to why, to be totally honest. Not that that was even a question. They explained very clearly that to many people on earth, they are considered demons. And while I believe that may be true for some, they explained that a contract between us had existed from that time period and offered to assist me in releasing weaknesses, addictions, and distortions of spirit I still carried from that previous life. Things that they themselves chose to seed within me in the very beginning of that journey. I never expected to have a conversation with a series of ancient demons in this life. It was never something I sought after. And like most of us, I have spent much of my professional journey opposing such forces. In fact, I absolutely still do. Absolutely. I had been raised within an extremely Christian family, and the very idea of ever coming into contact with such things was unheard of. You know what I mean? It was like the unholiest act, And yet here we were. The thing is, by this time I had learned enough to know that this was no joke, and the experiences I had been shown from that other life had truly opened a channel of connectivity within me. A part of what I was meant to realize by this was how our energy could be used for good or evil, right or wrong. It was truly our choice. I was shown that this contact was part of a correction and healing of certain transgressions committed in the past, and I thanked them for their assistance. Free of malice, hatred, guile, or negativity of any kind. It should be noted that neither of these beings asked for blood or sacrifice, only for this story to be told. It was that one day I would tell the truth. This is what happened. And it is, you know what I mean? It's like I followed through with that. I agreed, yes, okay, I will tell the truth of what you have shown me. I would like to think that there's a choice in that. I believe that there was. I could have just left it out. You know what I mean? I could have just left it out. They seemed to blow through like a strange cloud, each of them having their own impact in unique ways, yet absolutely linked at the same time, as if a seal had been broken and something was set free, so to speak. Osiris, or by the other name that he gave me, Orius, felt ancient and forbidden, almost alien. This being claimed to be a guide and an overseer of what we humans know as the underworld. In our conversation, he even let me know I would be visited by others in the future. Zagan was extremely charismatic, cunning, polished, yet also highly vampiric in a very distinct way. His purpose seemed more aligned with artful, hypnotic communication and the transformation of elemental energies in one's life. Those who will inevitably look up these names online will recognize them as being two of what are commonly referred to as the 72 Goetian demons of King Solomon. While I cannot prove that they were exactly who or what they claimed to be, I have no reason to doubt the information or identity that they claimed. I will say, just kind of looking at and commenting upon that experience, the first spirit felt more of the earth, the one known as Osiris, which I do believe was Osiris of ancient Egypt. I have no reason to believe otherwise, absolutely none. I'm not saying that is true. I'm not saying that there was any, any proving that was needed. It was something that I felt and accepted. Not that that needs to be stated. And then the other spirit, Zagan, honestly felt very dangerous. Not that one is worse than the other, but just it was like something about it. It was like there was like a sweet poison to it. Like something that felt royal in a sense. Like it almost announced itself with like, seriously, I might mention this, although I think I took it out because I didn't want to give too much time, to these beings, or these, I guess we could call them forces of, the underworld. But it was as if it announced itself with like this royal kind of, these almost like horns, like "Brr, brr, brr," like something like that. Just absolutely weird, just really, really weird, for lack of a better word. One of those moments that you look back on years later and you're like, that happens. It happened. Do I want to go there? No, no. But yeah, it happens. And so, what did they show me? What they showed me was like an education of the inner workings of the underworld and how it operates in our human realm. Each of them took me through vast mazes and labyrinths within the lower astral planes, where I was shown a host of negative forces, archons, demons, and other forms of negative energetic manifestations. I was shown the manner in which they interact with our energy and how they influence our behaviors, often through the vices, addictions, lust, pornography, technology, and more. They also educated me on the nature of what is often called, quote unquote, the death current, and the manner in which it exists within our world. The death current is part of a sentient anti-life frequency that exists as somewhat of a carrier for the waves of evil or parasitic negativity that attempt to dominate our world. It was born through the dualistic nature of life on Earth and cannot be removed from our plane. No matter what we do to overcome it, it will only continue to fester in the darkness and is essential to maintaining the balance of this earthly realm. I suppose a simple way to look at it is it's very much like the dark side of the force, as Hollywood as it may sound. It really is the best description we have. And maybe that's because it's true. And I didn't want to write this in the book, but it's now it's like, flavor of the moment. And during this experience, I was shown what I believe to be the first, I think, 2 or 3 layers of something that was represented. Well, now I know what it is. I can't remember the term for it, but it was like the inverted tree of life. And it was like I was taken through, I think, the first 2 or possibly 3 layers of that. And within that, we were shown, or it was demonstrated, the process of how they would extract the energy through blood, about how the death current would sort of find certain people and sort of create this momentum behind people and grant them things, and just, like the sort of addiction that it caused. And honestly, one of the other things that I was shown was how many people on the earth plane completely mistake their own darkness for something demonic, which is well known. You know what I mean? Many people have talked about such things, but it was almost like at a certain stage, it was like somebody was pointing to an image and saying, look, that's got nothing to do with why we're here. That's got nothing to do with us. That's them. That's this. Almost like, just so you know, that's this. It's not that. And I know I'm speaking in a very, very generalistic way, but it was, yeah, it was honestly one of the most bizarre, and I guess we could say triggering, you know what I mean? When I look back on it at this stage, I don't, it's not a thing where I'm like, I mean? It's almost like I just have to be totally honest about it. There is an avoidance. It's like an avoidance that I don't wanna crack open the lid on that, and not because of what's gonna come out, not because of like, "Oh, no, it'll set free some energies on." No, 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 it's not even that. It's just, it's like, it's already here, you know what I mean? It's present. It's everywhere alongside us already. We are living in a time on earth in which, the revealing and the demonstration and the just, the that knowledge is exploding in a natural way. And I guess it's just a thing that I have no desire to really like. Do you want to dive back into experiences of conversing with ancient demons? No. I mean, no, not really. And so I'm open to questions if anyone has any on that. I know it's triggering for some. And like I said, I was judged for this chapter alone, just for the stories in it. Over the last few decades, this is me getting back to the text here. We're almost done, by the way. Over the last few decades, it has grown in strength, amplified by the hostile control systems on Earth. And it was shown to me that if one is truly meant to heal and clear such matters, they must have a clear understanding of its true nature. Meaning it was like they needed to show me exactly what was really going on so that we would stop playing around and we would stop guessing and we would stop playing these stupid new age vanilla starseed games where everyone pretends that it's always this and it's always that, or it's always the reptilians, or every bad thing is an attack and every single negative emotion is a demon trying to steal your soul. It was like they needed me to know this is how it actually works. So when you're face to face with all these people out there who are in states of portrayal and performance, that you will be one of the ones that is equipped with the knowledge to discern and understand, which I think ultimately it comes back to that discernment. Part of the gift of discernment, part of understanding one's discernment, is being able to look at the truth of what is present, whether that be good, bad, right, or wrong, and being able to understand the authenticity, what some might even say the efficacy of the energy that is within it. And I think that when I look back upon what I was shown from these 2 literal demonic beings, it was as if there was this contract to come back in my life and say, hey, remember this, remember this, let me show you how this works. I'm saying it in sort of a silly metaphorical way. It was like I needed to be shown what it was so that I could actually do something about it. Not to say that, there's ever a time in which those forces will be cleared from our planet, which a lot of people don't like me talking about. But I mean, we chose to incarnate in a realm of duality. It doesn't stop being duality because the solar flash happens and disclosure takes place, it's always going to be that. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow. Other people are like, yeah, I know, it's about the choices we make. And that, I think, ultimately was really the heart of this chapter. It was like, let's show you an example of where you've been so that you can continue to make educated choices on the nature of your alignment in this journey. Let's show you what happened when you went this way. So, hopefully, if you're smart, maybe you'll go a different direction, which, is a good thing to say. Anyway, let me get back to the end of this chapter here, and then, maybe there's more to say, maybe not. I do not believe, let me rewind here. It is important to say, I do not believe these spirits are appropriate for everyone to connect with, and I do not recommend doing so. The thing is, when you really enter into doing this type of work on a substantial, full-time basis, you're going to have times in your life when things will walk in your door that you would have never imagined. Each one comes with its own lesson and understanding, and none of it is ever by mistake. That entire incarnation was, in many ways, the polar opposite of the work I do in this life. And I believe it was shown to me in this QHHT session to illustrate the many aspects of self I had to heal and overcome to reach the point I am at now. I was being shown what had happened in the darkness so I could make a new choice and return to the light in this life. It seems if you reincarnate long enough, you eventually get to play all the roles, good, evil, right or wrong. You get to play the hero and the villain, and most of us just keep coming back until we learn to balance those many opposing forces within us. I'd like to think this time around we've made much better decisions. In fact, I've met many others who have come to the same conclusions about their own journey. I've heard it said that in the end, many of us discover when you truly walk the path laid out by Spirit in this life, both heaven and hell will conspire on your behalf. From what I have seen in this world, it really is true. And with that, we will pause there at the close of this chapter. Boom. Anyway, thanks, you guys. Yeah, definitely one of the weirdest chapters of the book. One of the ones that I edited the most. You could tell it's shorter, right? Shorter than some of the other ones we've been going through. Part of that was because I cut out like 10 pages of like really weird, dark things that I had been shown, and man, other lives where I would say there was definitely there was a period of incarnations that I had in something that looked like a Renaissance era. It was like a Renaissance. I just say that for lack of a better description, like the I'll just call it some Renaissance era, in Europe, where I had worked with a group of, I don't know, maybe it was whatever you would call it, sorcerers, for such a cheesy term, right? And part of our duty was to develop and create poisons that could not be detected, poisons that could not be tasted, things that would have very, very specific effects upon consciousness. That was where I learned of the substance datura, which some of you have heard up in this life. I think it was a thing that we had used, not on yourself, with other people, and many, many, many forms of it. And it was as if we were tasked with being just this order that would honestly make people disappear through these ways that looked completely natural. They would suddenly get this illness, and what it was that we had developed poisons that were specific to certain people before that was even, how they're doing now, with the DNA testing, and so they can create, biological, agents that will only work with certain, groups of people. We could say that was something that I was shown that we were involved in other lives, which honestly was it was like, what? that was one of those ones that I did not expect to find that really shook me, where I was like, wow, okay, interesting. You know what I mean? And I think for people that have become more comfortable and accepting with the layers of the shadow self, those that have taken steps to sort of air those pieces of themselves out or give forgiveness, or we could say healing to those pieces of the self. I think for me, in the process of doing that, it was almost like, it's okay for you to know this now. Okay, it's all right. It's okay, for you to, remember this. And really, 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 really wild. I do know that in that era, there was a very famous person that we were tasked with removing, and they seemed to die very rapidly of some sort of illness. And it was actually a rare poison that was, created by the spiritual order. And I don't know if that's referenced in history. It probably doesn't even matter. You know what I mean? But it just didn't feel right to include that, you know what I mean? Did I want to go on some elaborate storytelling thing of how I lived a life where we secretly poisoned people? Like, what? It was, yeah, bizarre, man. Wild, wild stuff. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening to all of these bizarre things here today. I didn't see any questions going by, which sometimes is good, sometimes bad. Like I said, I know everybody's online. So it's like, everybody's live right now. Okay, cool. We have a lot of bilingual people in the chat. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you guys are here. You figured out my secret, which is Google Translator now. So it's a really good way to troll people if you say it in Chinese or Russian. But then they'll think you're trolling them, and you might be saying something really nice. So you gotta actually check it. But anyway, I want to say thank you to everyone. We're not going to linger too long. If there are no questions, I do want to let you know we're going to be back next week. What is our subject for next week? Because we're sort of, like I said at the beginning of today's show, we're going into the stage of the book where I'm like, wow, how am I going to put all these things in here? Well, screw it. I'll just put them together. So there isn't really like a point A to point B timeline that we're working with. We're really just going through a series of experiences. And in next week's exciting episode, we're going to be talking about my incarnations within the Templar Order, and honestly, a bunch more really triggering and weird reptilian stuff. I think there is a story that I did not put in this book about reptilians that I might talk about. I can't remember if it's in the book, but you guys will get to hear that next week. And so anyway, I want to thank everybody for hanging out. It will aid me greatly if you can hit the like button before we leave. If you have not subscribed to this channel, it would help me if you subscribe, although you'll probably get unsubscribed anyway. So, whatever. I also want to say thank you to the hostile alien AI, artificial general intelligence that has enabled us to have this live stream today. May they be so kind as to allow this video to get, I don't know, what'll be the target. Let's see, there's other people who can literally like fart on a live stream and get like 2,000 views. So we'll just keep it, we'll say 500. Is that possible? So send your prayers out there to the sentient AI God currently running planet Earth. Is there? Maybe that's a conversation for another time. But we will be back. We'll be back next Wednesday. And then, like I said, we're going to do a live stream show pretty soon. For anyone else that wants to hang out, I have it on good authority that we're going to be over at the Typical Skeptic podcast. I'm pretty sure on Saturday. It feels like Saturday, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be Saturday. But anyway, I love you guys. Thank you for joining us here today. We will be back in exactly 1 week. And in the meantime, in whatever part of the world you're in, don't take yourself too seriously.